Of in ADM for TOGAF, this session I will talk about technology architecture. The objectives of a technology architecture is that to describe the technology architecture for an architecture project, including the development of network, hardware, and infrastructure architecture. So basically the technology we'll be talking about is mostly about the hardware and firmware. Main objective is to develop a target technology architecture that enables the logical and physical applications and data components and the architecture vision to address the request for architectural work and stakeholder concerns. Additionally, we will be identifying candidate architectural roadmaps or roadmap components based on gap between the baseline technology and the target technology architecture. In order to do that, we have an approach. Within this approach, we will concern with architectural repository. As we mentioned before, an architectural repository is about the existing IT services as documented in IT repository or IT service catalog. It is also about the TOGAF technical reference model, TRM, we introduced in TOGAF session. We also consider generic technology models relevant to the organizational industry or vertical sector. For example, we will be looking at things, for example, a telemanagement forum, TMF, that has developed detailed technology models relevant to the telecommunication industry, and so on. For every different industry, you could refer to examples that has been developed in relation to that technology. We also consider technology models relevant to common systems architecture. For example, security architecture or things similar to that are a common architecture used across different industry sectors. For example, Open Group has reference models for integrated information infrastructure, IIIRM, that we mentioned previously. It focuses on the application level components and underlying service necessary to provide an integrated information infrastructure. In order to achieve those objectives and using that approach, we can consider a sequential steps in order to achieve all the objectives in this recommended approach. The first thing, similar to other ADM phases, is to select the reference model, viewpoints, and tools. The level of details addressed in this phase D, will depend on the scope and the goals of the overall architectural effort, of course. New technology building blocks being introduced as part of this effort will need to be defined in detail during this phase. Existing technology building blocks to be supported in the target environment may need to be refined in this phase. We need to ensure interoperability and fit for purpose within the specified technology architecture. The order of the steps in this phase, as well as the time at which they are formally started and completed, should be adapted to the situation at hand in accordance with the established architecture governance. For selecting the reference model, we need to review and validate the set of technology principles. These will normally form part of overreaching set of architectural principles, guidelines for developing and applying principles, and a sample set of technology principles are given in section 3 of Article 23 of Architectural Principles in TOGAF documentation. Within this, we could probably split this big step into smaller minor steps. First is to determine overall modeling process. For each viewpoint, as we mentioned before, we select the models needed to support the specific view required using the selected tools for the model or the method. We need to ensure that all stakeholders' concerns are covered. If they are not, then we create new models to address those concerns or augment existing models. The process to develop a technology architecture incorporates things such as define a taxonomy of platform services and logical technology components. We need to identify relevant locations where technology is deployed. We need to carry out a physical inventory of deployed technology and abstract up to fit into the taxonomy. We look at application and business requirements for technology. We need to answer the question as, is the technology in place fit for purpose to meet the new requirements? For that, we need to determine configuration of selected technologies. I want to step back to answer the question of whether this existing technology is fit. We can refine the taxonomy. We can also look at the product section that includes independent products. We also have a look at things to determine the impact of the configuration by sizing and costing, also by capacity planning and installation of governance and migration impacts. There are areas where the technology architecture may be impacted. By that, we look at performance. That's the area that new technology may impact, which refers to the granularity of the service. It will impact on platform service requirements. This also could possibly impact the maintainability if service granularity is too coarse. Then introducing changes to that service becomes difficult and impacts the maintenance of the service and the platform in which it is delivered. We also look at the location and tenancy impacts, whereby services might interact with each other over remote links and inter-service communications. Okay. We probably look at the availability of services could possibly be impacted by the new technology. Next minor step within the first step, we will look at identifying required catalog of technology building blocks. To do that, we look at the base on existing technology catalogs and analysis of applications carried out in application architecture phase. and collect a list of products in use. If the requirement identified in the application architecture are not met by existing products, then we extend the product list by examining the product availability or available on the market that provides the functionality and meets the requirement that we set the standard for. We also classify product against the TOGAF or TRM if appropriate, extending the model as necessary to fit the classification of technology products in use. If the technology standards are currently in place, apply these to the technology component catalog to gain a baseline view of compliance with technology standards. These two categories could be considered for developing within the technology architecture. One is the technology standard, and the other one is the technology portfolio. Technology standard is about what is the best choice in terms of generic concepts and technology itself, and the other one is the technology portfolio, means that what do we want it to look like, and then what kind or what set of technologies we're going to be adopting. Next minor step is to identify requirement matrix. Matrices should show the core relationships between related model entities. Matrices form the raw material for development of diagrams and also act as a key resource for impact assessment. We need some matrices such as application and technology matrices. Next minor step in this step is to identify required diagrams. What kind of diagrams we wanted to produce in terms of our design artifact. Diagrams present the technology architecture information from a set of different perspectives or viewpoints. So we're designing different diagrams to show the same thing for different stakeholders, because different stakeholders have different point of views and they have a different understanding of the system, and they look at the system from different views. One from business point of view, one from technical point of view, one from technology point of view, one from information point of view. So we need to develop different diagrams to cover those viewpoints. For major baseline applications or application platforms where multiple applications are hosted on a same infrastructure stack, we need to produce a stack diagram showing how hardware, operating systems, software and infrastructure and packaged applications combined with each other. If appropriate, we need to extend the application architecture diagrams to software distribution to show how applications map into technology platforms. All right. These diagrams are probably suggested to be considered. One is the environment and location diagram. Next, platform decomposition diagram. We could have a look at the processing diagrams, network, computing and hardware diagrams. We could probably look at communications engineering diagram as well. Or probably you could come up with some other diagrams that could indicate different viewpoints from the system. Next minor step is to identify the types of requirements to be collected. We are looking at relation or related to the technology domain. Okay, so we need requirements that are related to the technology domain, or what technology domain we are looking at. So we need to have a look at the requirements for that. We also look at providing detailed guidelines to be reflected during the design and implementation to ensure that the solution addresses the original architectural requirements. Next minor step is to select services. Services portfolios are combinations of basic services from the service catalogs in TOGAF TRM that do not conflict with each other. The combination of services are gain tested we test them again to ensure that they support for the applications. This is a prerequisite to the later steps of defining the architecture fully. The previously identified requirements can provide more detailed information about things such as requirements for organization-specific elements or pre-existing decisions or pre-existing and unchanged organizational elements, inherited external environment constraints, and things such as that. All right, so these are the minor steps that we do for this major step 1. Now, step 2 in our approach is to develop baseline technology architecture. Okay, so we need to figure out in this step is to what is it we standing on. Okay, what kind of a technology is in place and how are we using those technologies. We develop a baseline description of existing technology architecture to support the target technology architecture. And the scope and the level of details to be defined will depend on the extent to which existing technology components are likely to be carried over into the target technology architecture, and on where the architectural descriptions exists as described in TOGAF documentation point 12.2. Right, next step is step 3, and we need to develop a target technology architecture. This is where we are saying, okay, this is where we're going in terms of our infrastructure. A key process in the creation of a broad architectural model of the target system is the conceptualization of building blocks. Architecture building blocks describe the functionality and how they may be implemented without the detailed introduction by configuration or detailed design. Right? Step 4 is, of course, the gap analysis. So in step 2, we established a baseline for our current system, our current infrastructure. Step 3, we indicated where we want to be after this project. And step 4 is to look at the gap between the two. We develop or probably verify the architecture models for internal consistency and accuracy as well. To do that, we perform a trade-off analysis to resolve conflicts, if there is any, among the different views. We also validate that the model supports the principal objectives and constraints in place. We put in our standards step. We note changes to the viewpoint represented in the selected model from the architecture repository and documents. We also test the architecture models for completeness. Next major step is to define the candidate roadmap components. Now we know where we are, we know where we want to be, we know what is in between, and now we have to create a roadmap of component that we need to put in place in order to close the gap. Following the creation of baseline architecture and the target architecture and the gap analysis, a technology roadmap is really necessary to prioritize activities over the coming phase. This initial technology architecture roadmap will be used as raw material to support more detailed definitions of a consolidated cross-discipline roadmap within the opportunities and solutions phase. And step 6, we will be looking at resolving impacts across the architectural landscape. Okay, so we know what we're going to do, all right? So these are the things we need to do in order to achieve the target architecture, including the roadmap. But we also need to consider whether there is an impact on the existing systems if we implement this, and vice versa, whether the existing system will impact on our new components or new development while we're developing them. So we have to answer questions like, does this technology architecture create an impact on pre-existing architectures, or have recent changes been made that impacts the technology architecture itself in place? Are there any opportunities to leverage work from this technology architecture in other areas of organization? Okay, so we have some stuff here we're putting into place. Make sure we know whether there is a reusability or reuse opportunities. This technology architecture impact other projects that are ongoing at this point in the organization. Will this technology architecture be impacted by other projects that are currently in motion? And finally, step 7, we're looking at conducting formal stakeholder reviews. We need to check the original motivation for the architectural project and the statement of architectural work that we had in the beginning against the proposed technology architecture, seeing or asking if it is fit for the purpose of supporting subsequent work in other architecture domains. And then based on the answer to that, we refine the proposed technology architecture only if necessary. Step 8, we are looking at finalizing the technology architecture. In order to do that, we are looking at selecting standards for each of the building blocks, reusing as much as possible from the reference model selected from the architectural repository. We also fully document each building blocks that we are building. We conduct a final cross-check of overall architecture against the business goals, documenting rationale for building block decisions in the architectural document. We document the final requirement traceability report. We also looking at documenting the final mapping of the architecture within the architectural repository from the selected building blocks, identifying those that might be reused and published via the architectural repository. And finally, we finalize all the work products such as gap analysis. And of course, the final step in our approach is to create the architectural definition document. This document documents the rationale for building blocks decision, and it prepares the technology section of the architectural definition document, composing some of the things such as finalizing fundamental functionality and attribute semantics, ambiguities, including security capability and manageability. You could probably have a look at dependent building blocks with required functionality and name interfaces. We're looking at things such as interfaces, chosen set, supplied, APIs, data formats, protocols, hardware interfaces, standards, and so on. And finally, we map to business organizational entities and policies. Outputs of this phase is pretty much similar to other phases, previous phases of ADM, including refined standard versions, all the documentations similar to those, only within the architectural technology architecture domain.